A single touch, gentle and instinctive, in the marble halls of a mansion was enough to destroy a woman's livelihood and crack open a millionaire's carefully guarded world. Elena Morales, a housekeeper whose calloused hands had scrubbed floors for 15 years, reached out to comfort a crying child and within minutes found herself escorted from the estate in disgrace. But it wasn't the dismissal that would change everything. It was what happened 3 days later, when the boy who couldn't speak finally did, uttering one word that would unravel a web of lies, expose a devastating truth, and force a reckoning no one saw coming. Why would a simple act of kindness trigger such a violent reaction? The answer lies in a story of hidden guilt, a silenced witness, and a secret that had been suffocating in the shadows for 7 long years. The Harrington estate stood like a cathedral of wealth on the outskirts of Riverside Valley, a city nestled in the rolling hills of Northern California. The property sprawled across 30 meticulously maintained acres, surrounded by iron gates that rose 12 feet high and were monitored by cameras at every angle. The mansion itself was a modern architectural marvel, all white stone, sharp angles, and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the sky like mirrors, making it impossible to see inside from the outside world. Local residents called it the Glass Fortress, though never within earshot of its owner. Marcus Harrington was a name spoken with respect and fear in equal measure throughout Riverside Valley. At 41 years old, he was the founder and CEO of Harrington Luxury Developments, a real estate empire that had transformed skylines across California, Nevada, and Arizona. His projects were legendary: the Meridian Towers in San Francisco, the Desert Oasis Resort in Phoenix, the coastal elite residences in San Diego. Each property bore his signature style, cold, modern perfection designed for the ultra-wealthy who valued privacy above all else. Marcus himself was rarely seen in public anymore. After the death of his wife 7 years ago, he had become increasingly reclusive, conducting business primarily through video conferences and sending representatives to meetings. When he did appear, he was always impeccably dressed in custom Italian suits, his dark hair graying at the temples in a way that only enhanced his austere handsomeness. His blue eyes were sharp and calculating, the eyes of a man who assessed everything and everyone for potential threats or opportunities. Those eyes had not always been so cold. Staff who had worked for the Harringtons before the tragedy spoke in hushed tones about how different he had been when Isabel was alive. Back then, Marcus had been known for his rare but genuine smiles, his habit of hosting charity galas at the estate, his willingness to engage with the community. Isabel had been the warmth to his ambition, the heart that balanced his drive. But that warmth had died with her. Inside the fortress lived Owen Harrington, Marcus's only child. At 7 years old, Owen was a hauntingly beautiful boy with a mop of dark curls that fell into eyes the color of storm clouds, his mother's eyes. He was small for his age, delicate in a way that made him seem almost ethereal, like a child from a Gothic painting. His skin was pale from spending too much time indoors, and he moved through the massive house like a ghost, silent and careful, always aware of where his father was and how to avoid crossing his path unnecessarily. Owen had not spoken a single word since the morning of September 14, 7 years ago. That was the day his mother had died. The official story, repeated in news articles and whispered in coffee shops throughout Riverside Valley, was that Isabel Harrington had suffered a tragic accident. She had been descending the grand staircase in the early morning hours, lost her footing, and fallen. The medical examiner's report cited blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. There had been no witnesses except Owen, who was 2 years old at the time, too young to provide any coherent account of what he might have seen. The funeral had been a private affair. Marcus had emerged from his 6-month period of mourning harder, colder, and utterly devoted to protecting his son from the outside world. Owen was enrolled in Westridge Academy, an exclusive private school that specialized in children with special needs. The boy worked with specialists for his selective mutism, attended classes in small groups, and was kept on a rigid schedule designed to minimize stress and stimulation. But Marcus refused certain recommendations. He would not allow Owen to attend regular therapy sessions with a child psychologist outside the school setting. He would not permit Owen to have playdates or sleepovers with classmates. He would not consider residential treatment programs that specialized in childhood trauma. His reasoning, delivered in terse emails to school administrators, was always the same: my son has been through enough. I will not expose him to further invasion of his privacy or allow strangers to probe his grief. The school complied. When your annual donation to the institution exceeded 6 figures, your wishes carried substantial weight. At home, Owen lived in a luxurious prison. His bedroom suite on the 2nd floor was filled with every toy, book, and electronic device a child could want, but he was rarely allowed to leave the estate grounds except for school. A succession of nannies and tutors came and went, none lasting more than 6 months. The turnover was so frequent that estate staff had a running joke: working with Owen Harrington came with an expiration date. What they didn't joke about was why. Most left voluntarily, citing the oppressive atmosphere, Marcus's rigid rules, or simply the eerie sadness that permeated the entire house. A few had been fired for infractions that seemed minor: speaking too familiarly to the boy, asking questions about his mother, or once, attempting to take Owen outside to the garden without explicit written permission. The message was clear: Owen Harrington was to be handled with clinical detachment. Get too close, show too much warmth, and you would be removed. Elena Morales had been working at the Harrington estate for exactly 3 months and 2 weeks when everything fell apart. She had been hired through Premier Domestic Services, an elite staffing agency that provided household help to Riverside Valley's wealthiest residents. The interview process had been intensive: background checks, reference verification, a psychological evaluation, and finally, a 1-hour interview with Victoria Langley, the estate's manager. Victoria was a formidable woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair styled in a severe bun and pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog your flaws at first glance. She had worked for the Harrington family for 12 years, predating even Isabel's death, and ran the household with military precision. The position pays $28 per hour, Victoria had said during Elena's interview, sliding a contract across her desk. Considerably above market rate. In exchange, we expect absolute discretion and adherence to household protocols. Elena had scanned the contract, her heart racing. $28 per hour was more than she'd ever earned in her life. With overtime, she could make nearly $60,000 a year, enough to clear her late husband's medical debt within 2 years and still save for Lucia's college fund. What kind of protocols? Elena had asked carefully. Victoria had leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Mr. Harrington values his privacy intensely, particularly where his son is concerned. You will be responsible for cleaning common areas: living room, dining room, kitchen, main hallways, and the ground floor offices. You are never to enter the 2nd floor family wing without explicit permission. You are never to speak to Mr. Harrington unless he addresses you first. And most importantly, you are to maintain minimal contact with Owen. A polite greeting if you encounter him is acceptable. Conversations, physical contact, or any attempt to engage him beyond basic courtesy is strictly forbidden. Elena had felt a flutter of unease. May I ask why? Owen is a sensitive child recovering from significant trauma, Victoria had replied smoothly. Mr. Harrington has found that limiting his interactions with staff helps maintain stability in the boy's routine. It's not personal, Mrs. Morales. It's therapeutic necessity. The explanation had been reasonable enough. Elena signed the contract. Now, 3 months later, she understood the real reason for those rules, though she couldn't articulate exactly what she sensed. The Harrington estate wasn't just a home. It was a carefully controlled environment designed to keep secrets contained. Elena arrived each morning at 6 a.m., entering through the service entrance with her key card. She worked alone for the first 3 hours, moving through the vast, silent rooms with practiced efficiency. The house was beautiful in an austere way: high ceilings, minimalist furniture in shades of white and gray, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than Elena's yearly salary. But it felt cold, unlived in, like a museum rather than a home. She rarely saw Marcus. He typically left for his office by 7:30, driven by his personal chauffeur in a black Mercedes. On the few occasions their paths crossed, he would nod curtly and continue on his way, usually with his phone pressed to his ear, already deep in business calls. Owen she saw more frequently, though always from a distance. The boy would sometimes appear at the top of the grand staircase in the morning, dressed in his Westridge Academy uniform, navy blazer, gray slacks, white shirt. He would stand there, perfectly still, watching her work. His face was always expressionless, but his eyes followed her movements with an intensity that was unsettling in such a young child. Elena would smile and offer a quiet "Good morning, Owen," as permitted by the rules. The boy never responded. He would simply turn and disappear back into the second-floor hallway. But Elena noticed things. She noticed that Owen often appeared with shadows under his eyes, as if he didn't sleep well. She noticed that he was always alone, never accompanied by friends or even the warmth of frequent staff interaction. She noticed the way he moved through the house, always quietly, always carefully, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Most of all, she noticed the way he reacted when his father was present. The few times she had seen them together, Owen's entire body language changed. He became even more still, more careful, his eyes downcast. There was no laughter, no casual affection, no roughhousing or playfulness. Just a small boy standing at attention, waiting for permission to be dismissed. It broke Elena's heart. Elena understood trauma intimately. Her own daughter, Lucia, had been 12 when her father died. Elena had watched her vibrant, chatty daughter retreat into silence for months, processing grief in her own way. The difference was that Elena had held Lucia through it. She had sat with her daughter in the dark hours, stroking her hair, letting her cry, reminding her that she was loved and safe. Who held Owen? The question haunted Elena as she worked. But she kept her distance, honoring the rules that paid her bills and kept her family afloat. Until the morning of October 9th. It was a Tuesday, cool and overcast, with the kind of gray light that made the white stone house look even more forbidding. Elena had arrived at her usual time and was working her way through her checklist. She had just finished vacuuming the formal living room and was starting on the grand staircase, carefully polishing the mahogany banister that curved up to the second floor. The house was quiet. Marcus had left early for a meeting in San Francisco. Victoria was in her office near the kitchen, managing household accounts. The chef wouldn't arrive until 9 to begin lunch preparations. Elena was alone with her thoughts and the sound of her polishing cloth against wood. Then she heard it. At first, it was so faint she thought she might have imagined it. A small, choked sound coming from somewhere upstairs. She paused, listening. There it was again. Crying. A child crying. Elena's hands stilled on the banister. The rules echoed in her mind like a warning siren. Never enter the second floor without permission. Minimal contact with Owen. Maintain professional boundaries. But the crying continued, and it was growing more desperate. It was the sound of a child in genuine distress, alone and uncomforted. Elena set down her supplies and looked around the empty foyer. No one was coming to help. Victoria was all the way at the back of the house. Even if she called for her, by the time the estate manager arrived, who knew how long Owen would have been left suffering? The crying was coming from the second-floor hallway. Elena made her decision. She climbed the stairs, her heart pounding not from exertion but from the knowledge that she was violating a direct order. The second floor was forbidden territory, and she was crossing into it. At the top of the stairs, she found him. Owen was sitting on the floor outside his bedroom door, his small body curled into itself, knees pulled to his chest. His hands were clamped over his ears, and he was rocking slightly, back and forth, his face contorted with distress. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and his breathing was rapid and shallow, the classic signs of a panic attack. "Owen?" Elena said softly, kneeling several feet away from him so as not to startle him. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Can you hear me?" The boy didn't respond, but his crying intensified. His whole body was trembling, and his eyes were squeezed shut so tightly that his face was scrunched with the effort. He was completely lost in whatever terror had gripped him. Elena glanced down the hallway. Still no one. She was alone with a child in crisis. Every instinct she possessed as a mother overrode the stupid rules. She moved closer, speaking in the soft Spanish her own mother had used to comfort her as a child. Está bien, mi niño. Estás a salvo. Todo está bien. You're safe, Owen. I'm here. You're safe. She kept her voice low and soothing, the way you would speak to a frightened animal. Owen's rocking slowed slightly, his breathing stuttering as he tried to regain control. And then, acting purely on maternal instinct, Elena reached out and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. The effect was immediate. Owen's eyes flew open, wide and startled, meeting hers. For a split second, Elena saw something pass across his face, not fear of her touch, but relief. Desperate, profound relief, as if he'd been drowning and she'd just thrown him a lifeline. His breathing began to slow. His hands lowered from his ears. His gray eyes locked onto hers, and in them, Elena saw a depth of sadness and longing that no 7-year-old should carry. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you. You're safe. Get your hands off my son." The roar exploded through the hallway like a gunshot. Elena's heart seized in her chest. She spun around to find Marcus Harrington standing at the top of the staircase, having apparently returned to the house without anyone noticing. His face was a mask of fury. His blue eyes blazed with something that looked less like protective parental concern and more like pure, undiluted panic. He was still dressed in his business suit, his briefcase dropped at his feet, his entire body rigid with rage. "Mr. Harrington, Elena scrambled to her feet, her hands raised in a placating gesture. He was crying. He was having a panic attack. "I was just trying to." "I don't care what you were trying to do," Marcus snarled, advancing on her with frightening speed. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Elena instinctively took a step back. "You were explicitly told never to touch him. Never to come up here. Never to interfere." "Sir, please, I was only..." "Only what?" Marcus was in her face now, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "Only violating every rule you agreed to? Only putting your hands on my son without permission? Only deciding that you know better than me what my child needs?" He grabbed Elena's arm, his grip painfully tight, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "You're done here. Do you understand me? Done." Elena's eyes darted past Marcus to Owen. The boy had scrambled backward against the wall, his knees pulled back to his chest, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at his father with an expression that made Elena's blood run cold. It wasn't just fear. It was terror. The kind of bone-deep, visceral terror that came from knowing exactly what someone was capable of. "Victoria!" Marcus bellowed, still gripping Elena's arm. "Victoria, get up here now." Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Victoria Langley appeared, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she took in the scene, Marcus gripping Elena's arm, Owen huddled against the wall, the air thick with tension. "Mrs. Langley," Marcus said, his voice now coldly controlled, though his hand remained clamped around Elena's arm. "Call security. I want this woman removed from my property immediately. She's terminated, effective now." "Mr. Harrington, sir," Victoria began. "Now." The roar made both women flinch. Victoria pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. "Please," Elena tried one more time, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean any harm." He was in distress. "I'm a mother. I couldn't just..." "I don't want to hear your excuses," Marcus cut her off. His face was inches from hers now, and she could see a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His pupils were dilated, his breathing rapid. He wasn't just angry. He was afraid. Of her? No. Of what she might have seen. What she might have heard. What Owen might have said to her. "You violated a direct order," Marcus continued, his voice shaking slightly. You touched my son without authorization. You entered a restricted area of my home. The contract you signed was crystal clear about the consequences. 2 security guards arrived, men Elena had seen but never spoken to. They were large, professional, their expressions neutral. Escort Mrs. Morales off the property, Marcus ordered, finally releasing her arm. Make sure she takes nothing but her personal belongings. Check her bags. The humiliation was complete. Elena was marched down the stairs like a criminal, through the house she'd been cleaning for months, past the rooms she'd made spotless. Victoria appeared with her purse and light jacket, hastily stuffed into a cardboard box along with the spare shoes Elena kept in her locker. Your final paycheck will be mailed, Victoria said quietly, her expression unreadable. Don't attempt to return to the property or contact Mr. Harrington. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. Any discussion of what happens in this household is a violation of that agreement and will result in legal action. Elena wanted to argue, to defend herself, to demand answers about why a simple act of comforting a distressed child had triggered such a violent reaction. But the security guards were already ushering her toward the service entrance, and she could feel the weight of cameras watching her every move. Within 15 minutes of reaching out to comfort a crying child, Elena Morales found herself standing outside the iron gates of the Harrington estate, clutching a cardboard box containing her meager belongings, her entire livelihood destroyed. As the gates closed with a mechanical hum that sounded like a death knell, Elena looked back at the massive White House. Through one of the second-floor windows, she could see a small figure pressed against the glass. Owen. The boy had his hand flat against the window, and even from this distance, Elena could see his face was wet with tears. He was looking directly at her, and the expression on his face was one of absolute desperation. He looked like someone watching their only hope walk away. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back her own tears. What was happening in that house? What had she stumbled into? And why had a simple touch triggered such explosive panic in a man who built his fortune on staying cool under pressure? As she drove away in her aging Honda Civic, Elena couldn't shake the image of Owen's face. Not when she'd touched him, when he'd looked relieved, almost grateful for human contact. But afterward, when his father appeared. The boy had looked absolutely terrified. And beneath Elena's hand, in that brief moment of contact, she had felt something that haunted her all the way home. Beneath Owen's thin pajama shirt, along his upper arm, there had been raised lines. Scars. Multiple scars, like thin ridges beneath the fabric. The kind of scars that didn't come from accidents. The drive home from the Harrington estate took 35 minutes, but Elena remembered none of it. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, and her mind replayed the morning's events in an endless, nightmarish loop. Marcus Harrington's face contorted with rage. The bruising grip on her arm. Owen's terrified eyes. Those scars beneath his shirt. By the time she pulled into the driveway of her modest rental house in the Cedar Grove neighborhood, Elena's shock had crystallized into something sharper, a bone-deep certainty that something was terribly wrong in that mansion, and an equally strong conviction that she couldn't simply walk away. Her daughter Lucia was at school, which meant Elena had the house to herself. She sat at their small kitchen table and pulled out her phone, doing what she'd been too afraid to do while employed at the estate. She searched, Isabel Harrington death Riverside Valley. The results filled her screen immediately. Tragedy strikes Harrington family, beloved wife dies in home accident Riverside Valley Chronicle, September 15, 2017. Millionaire's wife falls to death, community mourns loss of philanthropist Northern California Tribune, September 16, 2017. Elena clicked through article after article. The story was consistent. Isabel Harrington, age 34, had fallen down the grand staircase in the early morning hours of September 14. She had suffered massive head trauma and died at the scene. Her 2-year-old son Owen had been in the house. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental death. No signs of foul play. The articles included photos of Isabel, a stunning woman with long dark hair, warm brown eyes, and a radiant smile. She had been heavily involved in local charities. Everyone described her as kind, generous, and deeply devoted to her son. But Elena noticed something crucial. Not a single article mentioned what Owen might have witnessed. He had been in the house, old enough to talk, to describe what he saw. Yet there was no mention of his account. And according to the records, Owen had stopped speaking immediately after his mother's death. What had Owen seen that morning? And why had he never told anyone? Elena knew she should let it go. She needed to focus on finding another job, not playing amateur detective. But that night, as she lay in bed unable to sleep, she kept seeing Owen's face. The terror in his eyes when his father appeared. The desperate relief when she'd touched his shoulder. And those scars. By morning, Elena had made her decision. She would find out the truth. She started by calling Carmen Rodriguez, an old friend who worked as a nurse at Riverside Valley General Hospital. They met for coffee at a small cafe downtown. "I need your help," Elena said after exchanging pleasantries. "And I need you to keep this completely confidential." Elena told her everything: the job, the rules, Owen's isolation, the panic attack, Marcus's explosive reaction, and the scars. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. "I remember when Isabel Harrington died," she finally said. "I wasn't working that night, but I heard about it from colleagues. There was talk. Nothing official, but talk. The injuries were consistent with a fall, but there were older bruises on her. On her arms and wrists, like someone had grabbed her. Hard." Elena's heart began to pound. Did anyone investigate? The ME ruled it accidental. But one of the ER nurses said Isabel had been in the ER twice in the 6 months before she died. Once for a sprained wrist, once for bruised ribs. Both times she said she'd been clumsy, had fallen. Classic abuse victim excuses, Elena whispered. Maybe. But the police found no evidence to contradict the ME's report. And without evidence, without witnesses. Carmen spread her hands helplessly. Owen was there, Elena said. He would have been a witness. A 2-year-old? Who stopped speaking right after his mother died? Carmen shook her head. Even if he saw something, who would believe a toddler? Elena's next step was finding Isabel's sister. The obituary had mentioned Diane Castellano of Portland, Oregon. After searching social media, Elena found her Facebook profile and sent a careful message explaining who she was and her concerns about Owen. The response came within 2 hours. "Yes, I would very much like to speak with you." That evening, they video called. Diane had Isabel's warm brown eyes, now tired and sad. "Thank you for reaching out," Diane said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been trying to get information about Owen for 7 years. You haven't seen him?" Elena asked, shocked. "Not since the funeral. Marcus cut off all contact. He got a court order restricting my access, claiming I was causing psychological harm. I've sent birthday cards, Christmas presents, all returned unopened." Elena told Diane everything she'd observed. When she mentioned the scars, Diane went very still. "Oh God," Diane whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My sister called me 3 days before she died. It was late, nearly midnight. She was whispering. She said Marcus had been drinking, that he'd lost his temper, that he'd grabbed her and shoved her against a wall. She said it wasn't the first time. She said she was scared for Owen." Elena's blood ran cold. "What did you do?" "I told her to leave. I begged her to pack a bag and get out. She said she would, that she'd pack while Marcus was at work and be gone before he got home. We made a plan. I waited for her call." Diane wiped her eyes. "Instead, I got a call from Marcus telling me my sister was dead. That she'd fallen down the stairs. That it was a tragic accident." "You told the police?" "I told them everything. They said they'd investigate. But nothing came of it. Marcus's lawyers threatened to sue me for slander. And without proof, I had nothing." "Owen was a witness," Elena said quietly. "A 2-year-old who stopped talking the day his mother died," Diane said bitterly. I've always believed he saw something. Something so terrible he retreated into silence. But I've never been able to reach him. What do we do? Elena asked. Diane leaned toward the camera, her expression hardening. We find proof. And we get that little boy away from his father. Over the next week, Elena and Diane worked together. Diane sent everything she had, photos of Isabel with bruises, text messages making excuses for injuries, emails canceling family visits. Elena reached out to former Harrington estate employees. She found 3 former housekeepers and 2 former nannies. All told similar stories when promised anonymity. One nanny described a disturbing drawing Owen had made at age 5, stick figures on a staircase, a tall figure at the top, a smaller figure at the bottom with red marks, and a tiny figure watching from the side. When she showed it to Marcus, he'd torn it up and fired her on the spot. A gardener reported seeing Marcus grab Owen's arm hard enough to make the boy cry out, the only sound he'd ever heard Owen make. When he'd stepped forward, Marcus had spun on him with such fury that he'd backed down. He was fired the next day. The pattern was unmistakable. Anyone who got close to Owen, anyone who witnessed Marcus's treatment, anyone who asked questions, all were systematically removed. Diane made calls to Owen's school, Westridge Academy, using her credentials as family. Elena reached out to former Harrington estate employees. She found 3 former housekeepers and 2 former nannies. All told similar stories when promised anonymity. One nanny described a disturbing drawing Owen had made at age 5, stick figures on a staircase, a tall figure at the top, a smaller figure at the bottom with red marks, and a tiny figure watching from the side. When she showed it to Marcus, he'd torn it up and fired her on the spot. A gardener reported seeing Marcus grab Owen's arm hard enough to make the boy cry out, the only sound he'd ever heard Owen make. When he'd stepped forward, Marcus had spun on him with such fury that he'd backed down. He was fired the next day. The pattern was unmistakable. Anyone who got close to Owen, anyone who witnessed Marcus's treatment, anyone who asked questions, all were systematically removed. Diane made calls to Owen's school, Westridge Academy, using her credentials as family. The principal, Dr. Patricia Hollis, was careful but revealed that the school had filed 3 reports with Child Protective Services in 5 years regarding unexplained bruises and extreme anxiety. Each time, CPS investigated and found nothing actionable. Marcus always had explanations. Sometimes children tell us the truth in ways that don't involve words, Dr. Hollis had said carefully. We just need someone willing to listen. The break came from Frank Garrison, a semi-retired investigative journalist Elena found through his blog. He'd written about Isabel's death 2 years ago, questioning the quick closure of the investigation. They met at a coffee shop, and Elena shared everything. Frank listened intently, his expression growing darker. This is about institutional failure, he said when she finished. Police, CPS, courts, all failing to protect a child because his father has money and power. I can make this public. Once the story is out there, authorities will have to act. But we don't have proof, Elena said desperately. Then we get Owen to tell us what happened, Frank said simply. We get him to speak. He hasn't spoken in 7 years. Because he's been too afraid. But what if we could offer him real safety? Frank leaned forward. Westridge Academy has a field trip to the Riverside Valley Museum next week. Owen will be there, away from his father's direct supervision. If we could reach him there. Elena stared at him. The plan was risky, potentially illegal. But she thought of Owen's face pressed against the window. The desperation in his eyes. 7 years of silence. Tell me what you need me to do, she said. 5 days later, Elena stood in the Riverside Valley Museum of Natural History, her heart pounding. She wore a visitor's badge and blended in with other guests. Diane had flown down from Portland and was positioned near the dinosaur exhibit. Frank was nearby with discreet recording equipment. The Westridge Academy group arrived at 10 a.m. 20 children in navy blazers, accompanied by 3 teachers. Elena spotted Owen immediately, small, careful, walking slightly apart from the others. They waited for their moment. It came in the Native American history section. The teachers were focused on a student asking questions about a display. Owen had drifted to a quieter corner, looking at a glass case containing artifacts. Diane moved first, approaching slowly. "Owen," she said softly. The boy looked up, startled. His gray eyes widened. "Owen, I'm your Aunt Diane. Your mother's sister." Diane knelt down, pulling out her phone. "I have pictures. Would you like to see?" She showed him photos of Isabel, laughing, holding baby Owen, full of life. Owen stared at the images, his small body trembling. Tears began streaming down his face. "I've been trying to reach you for so long," Diane whispered. "I love you. I want to help you. But I need to know," her voice broke slightly, "what happened to your mother?" The boy's mouth opened. Closed. His whole body shook with the effort of what he was trying to do. Elena moved closer, kneeling on his other side. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said gently. "You're safe. You can tell us." Owen looked at Elena. Recognition flashed in his eyes, the kind woman from the house. The one who'd touched his shoulder. The one who'd been kind. His lips moved. The first word in 7 years emerged as barely a whisper, but it was clear enough. "Pushed." The single word hung in the air like a thunderclap. "Who pushed her, Owen?" Diane asked, her voice shaking. "Who pushed your mother?" Owen's gray eyes filled with terror, but he forced the second word out. "Daddy." Everything happened fast after that. The teachers noticed Owen speaking and rushed over. Frank had recorded everything. Diane immediately called the police, refusing to leave Owen's side. Marcus Harrington was contacted and arrived at the museum within 40 minutes, his face a mask of cold fury. But when he saw Diane holding Owen's hand, when he saw the police officers waiting, when he realized his son had finally spoken, that mask cracked. "He's confused," Marcus said desperately. "He's been traumatized since his mother died. He doesn't understand." Mr. Harrington, the lead detective, interrupted. "We'll need you to come to the station to answer some questions. And Owen will need to give a full statement with a child psychologist present." Over the next hours, the truth emerged. Owen, with Diane beside him, spoke haltingly but clearly to a specialist. He described what he'd seen that morning 7 years ago. His parents arguing at the top of the stairs. His father shoving his mother. Her falling. The terrible silence after. He described the years since. His father's threats. The punishments when he almost spoke. The fear that kept him silent. He described why he'd finally broken that silence, because the kind woman who'd touched his shoulder had reminded him that not all adults were dangerous. And when his aunt showed him pictures of his mother, he'd remembered her voice telling him to be brave. The investigation that should have happened 7 years ago finally took place. Medical examiners reviewed the original autopsy with new information. Isabel's old ER records were examined. Former employees were interviewed officially. Financial records showing Marcus's suspicious asset liquidation were analyzed. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Harrington was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, child abuse, and witness tampering. 3 months later, Elena sat in a family courtroom as Judge Rebecca Morrison awarded permanent custody of Owen Harrington to his aunt, Diane Castellano. Owen stood beside his aunt, holding her hand. He was speaking regularly now, working with therapists to overcome 7 years of forced silence. He was still quiet, still healing, but the terror was gone from his eyes. Before they left the courtroom, Owen walked over to Elena. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice still tentative but growing stronger. "For not walking away." Elena knelt down, her eyes filling with tears. "You're so brave, Owen. Your mother would be so proud of you." "I know," Owen said, and for the first time, she saw him smile. A small, fragile thing, but real. "Aunt Diane tells me about her every day. She says Mom is watching over me." "I believe that too," Elena said. As they left the courthouse, Diane put her arm around Owen's shoulders, and the boy leaned into her embrace, seeking comfort, accepting love, finally safe. Elena watched them go, feeling the weight of the past months lift from her shoulders. She'd lost a job that day. She reached out to comfort a crying child. But she'd gained something far more valuable. She'd given a little boy back his voice. And sometimes, one word spoken in truth is worth more than a lifetime of silence. Justice, Elena had learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about giving the voiceless the courage to speak. And when they finally do, the truth sets everyone free.